Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Angela Gala. Welcome to the Charlotte Center for the Humanities and Civic Imagination, the Charlotte Center for short. We're thrilled to have you with us tonight. The Charlotte Center exists because we want to strengthen democracy. We want to be a catalyst to help you identify what civic action means to you. We want to bring people together around a deep consideration of the human experience to create better futures for us all. We open our programs with a poem because it allows us to step outside of ourselves for a moment. We can think about the words, ourselves, and reality differently so that we might see each other's light. It helps us enter into a space of hospitality and meaning. Here is a poem in honor of our guest speaker, Eboni Marshall Turman, and all of you. The poem is Blessing the Boats by Lucille Clifton. May the tide that is entering even now, the lip of our understanding, carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love your back. May you open your eyes to water, water waving forever. And may you, in your innocence, sail through this to that. We are so thrilled to welcome Eboni Marshall Turman as our speaker tonight. So you will hear next from my colleague at the center, Valeda Fullwood, who will share our format for the evening and invite you into conversation with each other. I'll see you again at the close of our evening. Until then, Valeda.
Thanks, Angela. I love Blessing of the Boats. Thanks for opening with that. Hello, everyone. I'm Valeda Fullwood with the Charlotte Center. Welcome to tonight's forum featuring Dr. Eboni Marshall Turman. And to all of you, welcome. I stress all of you because our forums are community building events at the core, inspired by insights of experts in the humanities. Thank you for coming, and thank you to our sponsors for making the center possible. With you, the Charlotte Center connects, considers, and ignites. Tonight, we will do all three. We start with connection, coming together in small groups just to get to know each other a little better. Then we'll move to consideration, listening actively and deeply to the words and meaning coming from our remarkable guest, Dr. Turman. We will then ignite our civic imagination, prompting us to consider a question together, openly in conversation. Let's begin with connect. Now, if we were in person, you would probably be seated at small tables with each other and have opportunities to engage in conversation. Even though we're on Zoom, imagine we're doing that just now when we go into our breakout groups. Tonight is interactive, so we strongly encourage you to have your cameras on. We have a few questions to jumpstart your conversation, and we ask you to sit with these questions for a brief moment before speaking. We will put the questions up on the slides. When you break out, share your answers with each other, giving everyone 2 to 3 minutes to talk. Then let the conversation flow from there. We'll stay in groups for 15 minutes and then return to the second part of our forum event. The virtual conversation is an opportunity to connect. Consider it a warm-up to re-engaging in the real world face-to-face as we once did way back in 2019. We believe relationships are the key to trust. And through conversation, we create possibilities to learn and to collaborate. We invite you to take time with your answer and to share a meaningful response. Tonight could spark the first of many conversations to come with the people you have in your breakout. Before you return from the breakout, think of 1 to 3 words that summarize your group's conversation. You'll be asked to share those words in the group chat. Be sure to stay in your breakout. We'll bring you back when we're ready after about 15 minutes or so. Here are tonight's conversation prompts to get you started. What word sums up your day? What brings you out tonight? And what do you dream of doing? We can go to breakout now. All right, I think everybody's back. I hope you had a great chat. Our group definitely did, and perhaps you met somebody new or learned something new. It was great. So remember, please put in the chat 3 words that sum up your breakout conversation. I know in our group, we summed it up as hopeful, confirming, and fluid. I mean, it just like we were old friends. We just talked nonstop the whole time. And now I'll turn it over to our executive director, Mark Paris, who will introduce and interview Dr. Turman.
Thank you, Valeda, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Mark Paris, and I'm thrilled to introduce Eboni Marshall Turman to you. Here at the Charlotte Center, we do our work centered in the humanities. And for us, the humanities offer a set of lenses through which to see the world: poetic, historical, philosophical, that help us perceive deeper truths, like turning a brilliant kaleidoscope. And we want to turn that kaleidoscope on the pressing issues of the day. The Reverend Dr. Eboni Marshall Turman helps us see through her lens and understand issues of race, faith, gender, and the common good in new and nuanced ways. Her own life is an expression of the humanities in full. Dr. Turman is a professor, minister, author, and public theologian. She is Associate Professor of Theology and African American Religion at Yale University Divinity School, where she teaches courses that include constructive theology, Christian ethics, and theology in the arts. She brings a womanist point of view to her work, and she will explain womanism to you. She brings that lens to issues in the public square generally, and the Black community and Black church particularly. She has won many honors and awards, including the Yale University Faculty Excellence Award for Research and Teaching. For the Dukies in the audience, Dr. Turman was formerly Assistant Research Professor of Theological Ethics, Black Church Studies, and African American Religion at Duke University, right up the road, and served as Director of Black Church Studies at Duke Divinity School. Her scholarship is extensive. She's the author of Toward a Womanist Ethic of Incarnation, Black Bodies, the Black Church, and the Council of Chalcedon, and has upcoming monographs entitled Black Woman's Burden, Male Power, Gender Violence, and the Scandal of African American Social Christianity, and a second monograph called Love's the Spirit, the Black Womanist Theological Idea. Dr. Turman holds degrees in philosophy, theology, and Christian ethics from Fordham University and Union Theological Seminary. 2 more quick notes about Dr. Turman. She is an ordained Baptist minister who preaches in pulpits throughout America, the youngest woman to be named assistant minister of the historic Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York City. And I suggest you look her up on YouTube and listen to her homilies. And she is a former professional concert dancer and member of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. She's a mom to very young twins as well. So Dr. Turman is with us from her home in Connecticut. She will talk to us for about 15 minutes or so, uninterrupted. And then she will give me the signal, and we will enter into a conversation where I will ask her some follow-up questions for about another 15 minutes. And then she will pose a question to us for conversation that Valeda will moderate. And that will be a time for you to ask any follow-up questions as well. So that's what we have ahead of us. So Dr. Turman, welcome to the Charlotte Center.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that very generous introduction. And thank you to both you, Mark, and Valeda for the invitation to be in conversation tonight, and to all those who work with you in this tremendous and important work that you are doing at the Charlotte Center. I am just so very happy to be with you and with this audience on tonight. I told Mark and Valeda the other day that I absolutely love Charlotte, North Carolina. I spent some significant time there at the beginning of my teaching career. I started teaching at Hood Theological Seminary in Salisbury, North Carolina. And so the only thing better than being here with you via Zoom would be to be there with you in the flesh. But either way, I'm just so very happy to be here tonight and to be speaking with, I am guessing, at least some members of the Charlotte community that I grew to love in my very short time there. As Mark has noted, I do have 19-month-old twins and working from home like so many of us. So let me apologize in advance for any background noise that you may hear as my dear friend and sister puts them down to bed this evening. It's the first time that I'm not doing it. So I've been given 15 minutes to address some significant aspects of my work and its intersections with the work of the Charlotte Center. In addition to being an academic theologian, I am also a Baptist preacher. And Mark, 15 minutes and a Baptist preacher rarely ever work well together, but I am going to hasten towards some semblance of a discussion, a coherent discussion starter for us this evening. I think that I will begin my comments tonight from the place whereby I enter into any conversation, especially those on the public square, those conversations concerned with the common good and the democratic project broadly construed. And of course, as a decidedly womanist, Black womanist theologian, I enter into these conversations from the standpoint of Black womanism. Now, what is that? What is this thing called womanism? Well, womanism is a way, Black womanism is a way of knowing and being and doing that emerges from the experiences of Black women as they are embodied at the interstices of race, gender, and economic oppressions, right? Womanism is an explicit no and a rebellion against patriarchy. It's a no to patriarchy, and it's a rebellion against it, especially as it is propelled by Black men and others. And it is an explicit no and rebellion against white racism, especially as it is propelled by white women. And what womanism does is it illuminates the realities of what we call intersectional oppression, right? So the ways that race oppression, gender oppression, economic oppression, and more contemporarily sexual oppression and oppressions based on ability, right? So ableisms. It illuminates it illuminates the realities of intersectional oppression by not only shining light on the moral problem of normative white male power, which it does, right? But also on the inconsistency between Black men's anti-racist postures, right? That can be, for as much as they are anti-racist, they can also be patriarchal and misogynistic, and white women's anti-sexist postures, that while they can be anti-patriarchal, can also often be racist as well, right? And what womanism does through the experiences of Black women is to say no to all of it, to say no to patriarchy, to say no to racism, to say no to economic injustice, right? It says you cannot be, you just can't be anti-racist on the one hand, but sexist on the other, right? and espouse some sort of justice making, right? You can't be anti-sexist on the one hand, but racist on the other, right? And call that justice making or justice seeking. Through the lived realities of Black women, right, at these intersections of oppression, what we might call in the academy of social subordination, at these intersections, womanism asserts that oppressions are always interconnected, right? They're always interconnected, right? So if you're talking about race, right, you are necessarily talking about gender too. And you're necessarily talking about economic realities as well, class, right? And sexuality and ability and generationality, right? Oppressions are interconnected. In other words, a womanist might argue that if one is racist, there's a good chance that one is sexist too. And if one is racist and one is sexist, there's a good chance that one is classist too. And if one is racist and one is sexist and one is classist, there's a good chance that one is heterosexist too. Black women's experiences and a womanist standpoint reveals, right, that oppressions are always interconnected, race, gender, class, right? And womanism endeavors to attend to what it has identified as triple jeopardy. That is the compounding of race and gender and class oppression in and on the bodies of Black women. And in attending to this triple jeopardy, right, or to this Black woman's experience of multiple oppressions all at the same time, it suggests, womanism, that Black women's experiences are typically unaccounted for in the public square, right? In the normative stories that we hear about women or Blacks, right? Because being both and Black and woman, the experience is always interconnected. And therefore, right, out of this intersectional reality, womanism emerges as a discourse of empowerment. It is a discourse that is rooted in the history and the culture and the concerns and the contexts that are unique to Black women's experience of oppression, their experience of resistance, their experiences of empowerment, and their flourishing. Now, when we consider the particularity of womanist theology, which is precisely what I do, we're thinking about a theological standpoint or a mechanism of God talk and practice of faith and action, in other words, right? That emerges in the early 1980s, taking on theological significance in 1985 with the publication of Katie Geneva Cannon's article, The Emergence of Black Feminist Consciousness. We can talk about that later, but I think what's important to know, especially in the context of the Charlotte Center, is that Katie Cannon, who is a matriarch of my subfield of womanist theology and ethics, was born in Kannapolis, North Carolina, right? As her parents and she's a descendant of those who were enslaved by the proprietors of Cannon Mills. Some of you may be familiar with this. So this notion of unveiling, exposing, and resisting the interrelationship of white supremacy and male superiority in the lives of Black women, right? What Katie Cannon would call the aggravated inequities of the tri-dimensional phenomenon of race, gender, and class oppression. This is emerging really from the heart of North Carolina through the work of Katie Geneva Cannon. She is now recently passed on, but from the heart of Kannapolis, North Carolina, the Cannon Mills plantation, I guess, right? So this is very much resonant with where you all are tonight, where some of you are at least tonight. And so in terms of Christian theology, womanist theology endeavors to center Black women where they have been heretofore invisibilized, ignored, demonized, right? Womanist theology, right, that positions itself within a womanist standpoint or moral scape, affirms the significance of Black women's faith, of Black women's struggle, of Black women's survival, for determining the character of Christian practice, what we do in the world as people of faith, and theology, what happens in the church. And I should say that womanism is not explicitly or exclusively Christian, right? Black women, Black Muslim women engage in womanist methods, and others, right? Certainly Black women who are engaged in indigenous traditions as well, indigenous religious traditions, right? So we see womanism emerging in multiple places, but my work primarily is focused on how womanism emerges out of Black women's Christian experiences. It opposes all oppression, right? Not just racial oppression on the one hand, which is what we will typically get in race discourses, right? And not just gender oppression on the other hand, which is typically what we would get from white feminist engagement as well. But it opposes all oppression: race, gender, class, sexuality, disability, generationality, caste, and it considers dialogue with church and society as its primary task. To this end, womanist theology leans on the principles that can be gleaned from the faith and moral wisdom of the lives of Black women who have historically resisted their own erasure, historically resisted anti-Black violence, invisibility, and overwhelmingly the unknowability, right, or the anti-citizenry that has been cast upon Black bodies in the public square. And they've resisted this reality by crafting counter narratives and counter publics toward the end of justice. So when we think contemporarily of Black women like Stacey Abrams and Latasha Brown, when we think of Black women who are on the front lines of battles for justice and equity in U.S. society, we have to recognize, and what we do in womanist theology and ethics is recognize that these women didn't just emerge, right, in a vacuum, right? They didn't just come out of nowhere. In theology, we would say they didn't emerge ex nihilo, out of nothing, right? That there is a tradition of resistance against Black civic unknowability, or this reality of the Black as non-citizen, of Black bodies as what is written into our Constitution, 3/4, right, of a human being. Black women have been resisting this from the very beginnings here in the US. And certainly that resistance work can be traced to the slavocracy, right? So when we think of women like Sojourner Truth, when we think of women like Harriet Tubman, when we think of women like Old Elizabeth, when we think about women like Mariah Stewart and Anna Julia Cooper, right? I could go on, right? These are the predecessors. We can even come into more modern times, Ella Baker, Septima Poinsett Clark. When we think about these women, we understand there is continuity between this witness in the public square, this witness against injustice that has been written into the experience, the Black experience in the US, into really the modern project of slavocracy and its logics that are undergirded by colonialism, there's continuity between their work and witness in the world and the work of Black women today who are doing the same things in resisting Black disenfranchisement and anti-Black violence as it shows up and out throughout society. So in crafting counterpublics toward the end of justice, so counterpublics that are talking back to a public square that is typically racist and that is typically sexist and that is typically classist, right? We then understand that a counterpublic is public space that uncovers and that gives voice to alternative perspectives and alternative standpoints, or what in womanist theological ethics, again, what I do on a day-to-day basis, would be identified as a counter narrative. It gives voice to those who have historically and typically been excluded from mainstream political discourses in power. When we think about counterpublics, right, more specifically about public space that gives voice to those who have been minoritized in relation to race and or gender and or class, sexuality, ability, and so on. These spaces are typically informed by community-centered frameworks. They're informed by frameworks that resist hierarchical leadership models, that support alternative meaning-making processes for under and misrepresented persons and or experiences. And finally, thinking about counterpublics, we recognize them as employing, in a general sense, a variety of approaches to the work of uncovering and giving voice to those who are historically silenced and invisibilized. And these approaches are buoyed by a community's intentions towards solidarity and toward community building that respond to and that resist injustice. These spaces, right, counter-public spaces, are also oriented toward envisioning and constructing otherwise possibilities toward the end of justice. So these kind of counter-public spaces want to dream about something new, something other than what is, and bring that to life. Such that when we think theologically or when we think ethically about a counterpublic, we must understand in counterpublic spaces that Black women specifically are building, we must understand that there's a moral element that is always compelling the effort toward this building of counterpublic space, right? There is an effort toward uncovering minoritized voices, as I've said, and envisioning just worlds and envisioning possibilities for human flourishing beyond what is right now. So I've been told I have 5 more minutes. And so I want to just talk very briefly about what some of these counterpublics look like today. And I must connect this to, I can't emphasize enough, rather, that there is historical continuity between Black women's crafting and building of counterpublic spaces, right? And so what we see today in, for instance, digital counterpublic spaces that are really compelled by the hashtag, right? So hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag I can't breathe, hashtag you okay sis, right? What we see propelled by the hashtag today was first propelled by the journalistic ingenuity, for example, of Black women like Ida B. Wells Barnett, right? Who in her activism shed light, created a counter narrative, a counter space through her journalism, a counter public that resisted the normative the kind of overarching imagination of rapacious Black men who rape white women, right? And she exposed something else. She exposed what she called a Southern horror, right? That was lynching. And she called it a red record of what was really going on in the South. She created this counter-public space through her writing, through her journalism, and eventually through her public speaking that would speak back to a public square that demonized and bestialized Black life. In this current moment of neo-lynching, of, as Michelle Alexander said several years ago, this new Jim Crow, nowhere, in my opinion, has digital counter-public space been crafted more clearly than with the Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And I know that there is some, recently there's been some questions, right, about the viability of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit more tonight. But let me just say that the 21st century progenitors of this movement were young, queer Black women. And they simply, I mean, the way the movement started was through a digital counter-public space that was created through a hashtag. Alicia Garza wrote on Facebook that she was just tired of Black people being killed. In much the same way as Ida B. Wells Barnett, wrote many years ago about being tired of Black men being lynched. Alicia Garza contemporarily writes about being tired, in the face of the Trayvon Martin, of course, of Black people being lynched by state-sponsored violence. And to that comment, that reflection on Facebook, Patrisse Cullors responds with a hashtag, Black Lives Matter. And that hashtag created a digital counter-public space that would propel a movement toward the end of justice, toward the end of taking public one basic concept that I think has been part and parcel of Black women's witness since the beginning of the modern project of anti-Blackness. And that is very, very simply that Black Lives Matter. I'll stop there, and hopefully we can open up some space for conversation.
So thank you, Eboni. There are so many directions to go in response to your comments. So thank you so very, very much. And I know our 15 minutes of conversation will go by very, very fast. What I don't ask, I hope the audience will. As I prepared for our conversation, not knowing exactly where you might go, I kind of focused on an interest in the roots of racism and the implications of understanding those roots for the decisions we need to make as a society going forward. However, before I get there, I'd like to ask you to share a personal story that gives context to your work. You recently shared the story on a podcast about a moment in your life when you suddenly became aware of the politics of your body. It has to do with when you were asked to line up with other Black women by a pool. Would you share that story very briefly and how it has since informed your work and life?
Oh, very briefly, Mark. So yeah, when I was a young dancer, again, very briefly, we were invited to one of our benefactors' homes, and it was a very beautiful home in the suburbs of New York City. And all of the dancers, if I'm remembering, the majority at least were Black people, both women and men. And the majority of the benefactors were white. There was one, if I remember correctly, many years ago, there was one Black woman, but the majority were white. All of the persons who were providing domestic service that day were Black women, and they were all dressed in kind of the old school black and white maid uniforms. I'd never seen that before as, you know, a child of the 90s. That was and someone who grew up relatively working class, right? That was not part of my experience. We were asked to line up in front of the pool and say our names. And so the image that stands in my mind with great clarity is Black bodies lined up in front of the pool, preparing to say our name to a group of white benefactors who were seated and being served by Black women in black and white uniforms, drinking lemonade in the shade while we stood in the hot sun in front of the pool and said our name. And that experience made me realize that I would never be in that situation again. And it also made me realize something. I didn't have the words then to put together, but it made me realize something about my Black body in relation to white power. And I determined, and it was an experience of deep subordination. It was its own auction block in a sense, right? Stand here and say your name so that we can get good money from these kind white people. And it wasn't narrated that way specifically, but that is how I interpreted the context. And I decided then that this would never happen to my body again. And since then, I have been working fairly consistently to think about the body and to think about it at these intersections of race and gender and social subordination broadly construed.
Thank you for sharing that, because I often think that when we're committed to work that is passionate for us, there's often a personal story at the heart of it that is often motivating, that we draw upon in doing our work. So thank you for sharing that. In that same interview, it was a conversation you had with Daniel Hodge. You said, "I teach for liberation and for transformation." Do you remember saying that?
I do. That's part of my teaching philosophy. Mm-hmm.
So what do you want to free people from, and what do you want to transform them to?
I want to liberate people from submitting. I want to support liberation from the lie that we have been told about ourselves. And for Black people, that is that we are second class, that we are not fully recognized as members of this society. And that is right in not only in the public square, but in church and in academy as well. I want to liberate, I'm interested in liberating white people from the sin of white supremacy and superiority. And I want us to be transformed together toward a more inclusive imagination of who we might be, apart from these narratives of superiority and inferiority that have really structured our social interactions from the beginning of this project called the US.
So that sounds like you're saving souls. Is that the work you are doing, saving souls?
Well, yes. But Mark, I'd also say that I am from a tradition of liberal, liberationist theological imagination that would suggest that one cannot save souls apart from saving bodies. And so for as much as I want, I want people to imagine something more than this world has to offer us, I also want them to imagine this world that can be made new and that can be transformed into a space of justice for every single body, not just those who are fanned and served by Black women in Black and white domestic outfits.
Well, I'd like to run something by you about the origins of racism that implicates the church and get your response. I saw a documentary on HBO recently called Exterminate All the Brutes. Have you seen it?
I haven't.
Well, it's a visual essay by a filmmaker named Raoul Peck about colonization and genocide. And he makes this argument that colonizers believed they were saving souls too, right? And that Christian evangelism is based on an idea that a person who is saved is in a superior moral position to a person who is unsaved. And the person who is unsaved is not fully in God's grace unless and until they are saved. And that logic has led to othering, that non-Christians are less than, not fully human, brutes, and centuries of dehumanization and violence have followed. And he makes this argument that white supremacy arises out of white European Christianity in this toxic mix with capitalism. Racism arises out of white European Christianity and capitalism. Colonization arises out of white European Christianity and capitalism. And then he tells the story, beginning with the Crusades, to genocide of indigenous peoples, to slavery, to the Holocaust, to alt-right nationalism today. Do you think Peck is right? Do you think that racism and sexism and classism and othering as we know it in America today is fundamentally rooted in capitalism and white European Christianity?
Well, I don't need Peck to explain that. I wrote a book about it. And I would say that it is rooted in a distorted practice and theological vision of Christianity. Absolutely. I mean, because what happens is that the savage, right, the non-Christian becomes attached to a racial imagination, as Willie Jennings argues in his groundbreaking text, right, The Christian Imagination. And so certain kinds of bodies, this kind of Christian, non-Christian binary gets reworked, right, as a Black-white binary, which is what I pick up in my book, right? And it positions the Black body as bestial, right, as dishonorable, as demonic, right, as distant, as far from God, and the white body, right, as godly, as honorable, right, as holy, as pure. And so yeah, I think, but that's based on I don't think that Christianity inherently, right, does that. I do think that a bastardized version of a Christian theological vision that emerges out of European colonial logics is definitely at its root.
Well, what do we do with that? Is that an argument for dismantling capitalism and evangelical Christianity?
It is, yes. These are really interesting questions, Mark. Yes, I think that it is definitely against an argument for dismantling Christian logics and the capitalist acquisition that are attached to them, especially within the context of the US, right? Dismantling that, right? My students who are tremendous would argue for the abolition, right? Complete abolishing of the church in this regard. I agree with that to a certain extent, because I would want to argue that what Christianity through the person of Christ offers us is not what white evangelicalism gives us, right? That the white Jesus is not the white Jesus of white evangelicalism that diminishes bodies that diminishes Black women, that diminishes bodies that do not ascribe or are incommensurate, for instance, with white, male, middle class, cisgender, heterosexual, at least in public, normativity, right? That white Jesus is not Jesus. Right? And that there needs to be a robust kind of archaeological uncovering, right, of Jesus, what I would argue as the Black Christ. Although that doesn't go far enough for others, for some others, right? But a God who is Black and who really does stand on the side of the oppressed. If we accept that reality, then that undoes the logics of slavery. It undoes the logics of colonialism and indigenous genocide, because it suggests that the God who is supposedly on the side of the colonizers, calling them into this new world, this promised land, right, to take over and to reign, have dominion over, right, that it undoes all of that. And it says, no, actually, God is with those who suffer. And God is with them, helping to bring them out of that suffering.
Yeah, so I think we've tripped on something, which is that the implications of womanism is potentially something that reorders society as we know it, at least in the United States. And we can see the cultural wars at work in this discussion. The question that we posed for this event was, how might addressing race and gender issues honestly in America result in a new understanding of the common good? And again, I'm sort of interested in the implications going forward of reckoning with this history.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is an active and fierce debate in America today, as you know, about critical race theory, and whether teaching it in our schools and workplaces and halls of government serves the common good and the nation. How do you understand critical race theory? How do you characterize the debate? And what is your point of view on whether it is good for the nation?
So first of all, I don't think that what people are actually talking about in the country, I don't think that people actually know what they're talking about when they're talking about critical race theory, right? Critical race theory is an actual theoretical standpoint and methodology that was developed by Kimberly Crenshaw to think about how race and structures of race, gender, and class, the intersections thereof, are built into our society and therefore automatically inherently disenfranchise certain groups of people. And that's a very basic explanation of critical race theory. And no one is teaching critical race theory in elementary school or junior high school, okay? Right? I didn't get to critical race theory in any serious way until graduate school, to be completely honest with you. I mean, we're talking about teaching what's happening in this debate in many instances, right? It's talking about slavery. It's talking about very basic realities of US history, enslavement, indigenous genocide. It's not about the structured logics, right? This is not what we're introducing in fifth grade, the structured logics of intersectional subordination and oppression and the ways that works through all of our social institutions, right? We're just talking about teaching history, and people are fighting back against that. In terms of what's happening in seminaries and theological schools around critical race theory, again, I don't think that people actually know what they're talking about when they're arguing against it. But it's toward the preservation of a white God, of a white Jesus. And someone just said, well, Jesus was not white. Well, of course Jesus wasn't white. But the progenitors of a white evangelical vision and faith that want to be, that want to pretend that race actually doesn't matter, want to sustain a universal vision of a God who is white and for whom race does not matter. Because if race doesn't matter, we don't have to attend to the people who are suffering the most. We don't have to. We can just all get to heaven without any concern for the bodies that are actually suffering, and that are suffering because of the interstructured logics of racism and sexism and economic injustice, right? And so the argument against critical race theory is an argument for more of the same, which is white male power, not only in the public square, but in the church too. And you know, Black people are fed up with that, and our allies. And so we're going to resist that with everything that we have.
I would have been remiss not to have asked the question, so thank you for addressing it. There is a book that was released this week called Punch Me Up to the Gods. It's a memoir by a writer named Brian Broom, an African-American man. And the book explores how Black boys are often socialized into rigid conceptions of manhood and masculinity, and why that is, and how that often comes at the expense of Black boys and men and diminishes Black community life. Does womanism address issues of Black male identity? Is that something you're interested in?
Absolutely. One of the core tenets of womanism is traditional communalism. And so there is a fundamental recognition that the wellness, the wholeness of the entire community is what is at stake for Black women. Black women birth Black men. And so, and not only that, we are connected to our brothers and to our fathers and to our kin who are men. And so we are concerned for Black men, but our concern for Black men is only complete when we also hold up Black women's experiences as well. And so when we think centering Black women is not toward the invisibilization of Black men, and certainly not toward the invisibilization of anyone, it is merely to suggest the ways that Black women's subordination actually ties into just about everybody else's subordination. If we want to get at, right, get clear about and get at what's really going on with race, we cannot invisibilize Black women who are seated at this intersectional reality of race, gender, and class oppression. What happens to Black women necessarily impacts Black men, because again, Black women are mothering the community. When all of these Black men are shot down in the street, who do the cameras turn to? Their mothers. And they call them the mothers of the movement, which is problematic, which is problematic, because why are Black women positioned to mother, right, Black death? It's something to talk about. And yet and still, right, therefore we cannot separate these realities. We must privilege Black women who, because of the logics of patriarchy, have consistently been invisibilized in the struggle for Black freedom. Black freedom is not only about Black men, it involves all of us. And therefore we have to be concerned about Black women, Black children, Black trans folks, Black queer folks, and all of us who make up the community.
So Eboni, I'm getting the signal that we are running over my section with you. I do want to conclude with one question, and if you could give me a short answer, that would allow us to transition into our next section. There was an article I read in the Washington Post this week, says America is having a Black Renaissance, that this is a moment in which Black folks are flourishing, and that there is a fundamental shift underway, allowing most people of color with talent and a strong sense of agency and a little bit of luck to thrive. That if we take a step back, this is really a moment of an amazing period in the Black community. Do you believe that is true?
I'd ask who wrote the article.
Perry Bacon, he's an African-American columnist.
I would suggest that Black people, the fact that Black people are still here after 400 years of the burden of white supremacy and white power means that Black people have been flourishing and will always flourish. We are a people of joy. We are a people of rhythm. We are a people of bright color. And yet, for as much as that is the case, for as much as we find music, we find joy, we excavate celebration, we are targeted. There are targets that are still on our back. And so while we do celebrate our wins and our triumphs, we cannot forget that we are disproportionately targeted by every mechanism of state-sponsored death that there is. And we have to be able to attend to both in a serious and rigorous way. So yes, we sing and we also march.
Thank you, Ebony. That's such a wonderful way to end. So I am going to exit gracefully and turn it over to Valeda, and we'll use our remaining time for questions from the audience. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Turman. Thank you, Mark. I imagine many of you have lots of ideas and questions stirring, just as I do. And I want to invite you to pose your questions. You can come on stage. And by that, I mean, turn on your camera, come off mute, and pose your question. You can also post questions in the chat. My team member, Kristen, is monitoring the chat and will give me a heads up about questions that are popping up. I see one right off from Tomas. Tomas, will you come off mute and on camera and pose your question to Dr. Turman?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Turman. That was enlightening, wonderful topics, and it raises so many questions, in my opinion. But one I had, and I'll just read it, but throughout centuries and through today, violence, oppression, racism, sexism have been carried out in the name of religion. How do you reconcile religion or the interpretation of the religious text and Black womanism as a researcher, professor, theologian, driving this concept of liberation and transformation in your students?
Well, part of my work is reinterpreting the text. I don't accept the normative interpretations that have been handed down to me. And part of what womanism does is suggest to us that we can, and my work has been focused on reimagining what the tradition actually is and ought to be. It is about rewriting and reasserting doctrine. It is about reading texts for liberation instead of for oppression and suppression and depression of communities. And so I attend to the witness of Jesus as gospel as my starting point for thinking about the faith that really is propelled by his witness. And I am in my book, Toward a Woman's Ethic of Incarnation, I build an entire argument around justice for not only Black women primarily, but for every body that defies normative respectability, which is historically read, as I've said, white male, middle class, cis het in public. And I suggest that Jesus tells us a different story about bodies who defy that, bodies that defy that witness that is seen as universal. And so I rewrite essentially the doctrine of the incarnation and say what the tradition gives us through the patristic fathers, right, and their patriarchal, right, lenses, misogynistic lenses, right, is not really what Jesus has given us. And that is the work of the womanist, to uncover, to dismantle, and to envision anew a faith that is life affirming and not death dealing. Thank you for your question, Tomas.
Thank you. I see, Bruce, you have a question. Will you come off mute and on camera and pose your question to Dr. Turman?
Dr. Turman, thank you for being here. What is your perspective on the increase in intimate romantic relating that is interracial?
Can you say more, Bruce?
Well, I take your points very seriously. I'd like to have my intellect catch up with your words. It appears that part of what you're saying might be prescriptive for individual, very personal, intimate relationships that are interracial in nature. And I'm wondering if you feel that that people who are involving or considering themselves to possibly involve themselves in an interracial relationship should read your book, for instance.
Well, I haven't thought in any sustained way about interracial relationships. I will say that I think just basically that people should be able to love whoever they love. And if someone wants to be in an interracial relationship, then they should be in an interracial relationship. I do also believe that love is a political act. And I believe that Black love is a very kind of rich demonstration against, a very rich witness against that which diminishes Blackness, Black humanity, and the possibility of Black love. But I also believe that people as human beings should be able to love whoever they want to love across race, across gender, across sexual distinctions. And I will say that the logics, right, the logics of miscegenation statutes, for example, that are at the core of many of our states, right? I've just written a chapter on the laws of Virginia, which had a miscegenation statute. I'm not writing about that specifically, but right, it was against the law for Black and white persons to be in relationship, to be married. I mean, even more than that, it was against the law for like Black and white people to sit together. Like it was just against the integration was not a thing. Segregation was the law of the land in all aspects, right, of society. And so those logics are rooted in the bestialization of Black people, right? They are rooted in the subordination of Black humanity to white humanity, right? They're actually rooted in arguments against Black humanity. Black people are not fully human. And therefore, I mean, you have religious arguments for polygenesis that say that Black people weren't even created in the creation, that there was a second creation that happened, right? Where Black people were created with the animals. I mean, these are actual theological arguments on the books made by white preachers, typically in the South. And so when we think about where these statutes against interracial relationships come from, we understand that they are rooted in the project of anti-Blackness. And so, of course, right, as someone who espouses a pro-Black positionality and who lives deeply into the riches, right, of Black humanity, I would always say that we have the right to love and live with and be with whomever our heart so desires, in mutuality.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to invite Sheree on camera and off mute. You had a comment based on your lived experience in response to that question.
I would say that I could probably answer that question for you. I think I have to apologize because I'm like in working mode and mom mode, but for my appearance. But I think in respect to that comment, I am just celebrated 16 years in my interracial relationship with an interracial child that has to understand all aspects, and not only that, he's international on top of all that. So it's a lot going on in there and a lot to unpack. And I'll be honest with you about how I met my husband. Dr. Turman makes a good point. Like there is to me, even still, there's a special thing about Black love, simply because it flies in the face of what society thinks, that Black people don't really love each other, that they're in a relationship for some other reason, that there's not really true love there. But when you go back and look at the Black family, that was a thing. You got together, you stayed together, you did what you needed to do to keep your family together. But just circling back to my experience with that is I'm a very spiritual person. The whole religion part, I was making notes while she was talking, because it's a lot to say, and the whole thing about the lie that we've been told, and the church, and how even when you go to the Black church, you can even hear in a different vein the still preachings of the lies that we're told. So you have to then start thinking for yourself and who you are and what your relationship with God is and what your spirituality is. My relationship is not the same as your relationship. And I may see in one lens what you would see in another, and you may be catching up or having your own kind of thing there. But when I met my husband, I had been dating plenty of people. And finally, I just came to a point where, you know what, I'm stopping. I'll just go with what God brings me. And I'll pray that he gives me enough foresight to understand what that means. And I could have cared less if he was Puerto Rican, white, Black, whatever. It was what he wanted me to have. And when I took that and stopped looking for myself and let him look for me, that's when I found him. But I had to be open-minded enough and understand enough about being comfortable in my own skin and being comfortable with relationships with people. Because at the end of the day, it's a relationship with a person that gets you through, regardless of what you're going through. And so you have to be, I don't want to say the word evolved, but you have to be evolved enough to understand that you are a person, they're a person, and people gravitate towards people. And when I just said, this is on him, it's not on me anymore, he brought me my husband. And I will tell you that he gave me 80% to 90% of everything that he knew I needed to be my whole self. And he gave me the part that I also wanted. But what I wanted was less important than what he wanted for me. So he brought me somebody to me that helped me be the best me that I could be. And when you start thinking about things in terms of that, the color of who someone is goes away, because you let it go away to look at a person for who they really were and not for what society or anyone else has told you they're supposed to be. So that's my answer to your question, Bruce.
Thank you, Sheree. All right, I think we're winding down, coming up on the hour. I can't thank you enough, Dr. Turman. It's been a thrill. I know I heard you speak once, probably 7 years ago, and another time, I think virtually in more recent years. And to have you say yes to the center and be a part of tonight's conversation is a dream come true for me in terms of going back to that breakout question. And so I thank you for the provocative ideas and insights you've shared tonight. And we're grateful that you joined us. I'm going to turn it over to my team member, Angela Gala, who will wrap up tonight's conversation. Angela?
Thanks so much, Beleda. And thank you, Dr. Turman. We will wrap this evening the same way we began, with a little more food for thought. Here's a poem entitled Kitchenette Building by Gwendolyn Brooks. We are things of dry hours and the involuntary plan, grayed in and gray. Dream makes a giddy sound, not strong like rent, feeding a wife, satisfying a man. But could a dream send up through onion fumes, its white and violet, fight with fried potatoes and yesterday's garbage ripening in the hall, flutter or sing an aria down these rooms, even if we were willing to let it in, had time to warm it, keep it very clean, anticipate a message, let it begin. We wonder, but not well, not for a minute. Since number 5 is out of the bathroom now, we think of lukewarm water, hope to get in it. Thank you, Dr. Turman, for being with us tonight. Great conversation. Our mission is to deepen human connection and inspire community. Our programming includes SenseMaker, a community outreach initiative where we collect stories of lived experiences of citizens across our city. Wisdom Wednesdays, a lunchtime inspiration series, which, by the way, our next Wisdom Wednesday will be about the search for consciousness with neuroscientist Baroness Susan Greenfield and meditation guru Ranjit Diora. The Forum, which we'll do again in July and in person, details to come, and a civic reflection series and year-end festival designed to inspire people to turn their ideas into action. If what we are doing resonates with you, here are some ways you can engage with us. Tell your friends about us, like us on social media, and help us build community. Sign up to receive our monthly brief done by the lovely Valeda. Make a tax-deductible donation. Your contribution strengthens our community. Connect us to people who can help move our organization forward. Share your ideas with us and participate in our programming. We would be so excited if you did. Thank you to our donors and sponsors again for making our work possible. This concludes our programming for this evening. We'll thank our sponsors on screen, and then we'll have some after-party mingling if you'd like to stay with us. And my last thank you is to David Phillips, our producer, for always making us look good and for his thoughtful collaboration. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Good night.